Welcome back, everyone. This time on the show, we're talking about Batman for the Game Boy. Batman, the video game, is actually the first of 4 different games based on the Caped Crusader for the Game Boy. But since none of the others are direct sequels to this one, I'm just going to leave more talk about those out of this video. Batman was released in 1990. These days I suppose it would be considered a launch window game for the Game Boy, but back then it was just considered an early title. Whatever label you choose to put on it, Batman is clearly not using the Game Boy to its full potential. That said, I still think there's some fun to be had in it. Batman himself is very tiny on screen. He's like an adorable little baby Batman. The graphical style of the game sorta reminds me of Mario Land, for better or worse, which was also an early Game Boy title. Visually, it's not horrible, but it's a bit on the simple side, and most of it is a bit generic looking. However, once in a while, it does have some nice animations, like when Batman dies, or when you knock the Joker into the vat of acid. I think my biggest complaint with this game is the fact that Batman has a gun as his main means of attack. This is a strange choice because in general, Batman doesn't use guns. It's one of the defining elements of his character. It is, however, one of the simplest concepts in gaming, and so that's likely why it was chosen. The platforming in the game is sort of a mixed bag. Batman jumps very high, like 4 or 5 times his own height. The levels are designed for this, but at the same time it can feel a bit floaty, and I missed more than a few jumps early on when I was getting used to it. Toward the end of the game, there's also an auto-scrolling stage that made me want to pull my hair out. The platforming is alright when you have time to judge your jumps, but being forced to act quickly really brings out the small flaws in the controls. Later in the game, the stages gain a little more variety with the addition of flying levels. You pilot the Batwing and shoot everything in sight. These parts actually really impress me. For an early game, the scrolling here is excellent and it controlled very smoothly. These levels seem pretty tough at first, but eventually you can breeze right through them. Definitely a highlight for me. Anyway, back in the platforming levels, there are these small blocks littered throughout the stages. Light-colored blocks are just there to get in your way or to jump off of, and dark-colored blocks contain power-ups. However, I hesitate to call these power-ups since many of the guns you get are more difficult to use than your original gun, and some downgrade your firepower intentionally. The gun upgrades are very similar to those found in the NES game Fester's Quest, which also happens to be made by Sunsoft and also happens to feature an unlikely character with a gun. Either way, I found this to be an extremely frustrating part of the game, especially since it often puts the power down blocks in places where you have no choice but to collect them, and that's just dirty pool. The enemies in the game are also somewhat disappointing, since they're essentially brain dead. They just run in straight lines and don't really react to you at all except to shoot when you're on the screen. Most of the time, simply ducking can avoid pretty much anything they shoot at you. So yeah, no great AI here, but I suppose that's what hanging around places like a factory and a chemical plant will get you. Death in the game is pretty harsh. When you die, you have to start the entire level over from the beginning. Some of the levels are fairly long, so this can be a big time pain, especially since every level has lots of pits for you to fall into. If you run out of lives, you can continue an unlimited number of times from the first part of a multi-part stage, but there is no save feature. In order to beat this game, you need to be willing to do it all in one shot. No passwords, just one straight run through. I would estimate the game's length to be about 2 hours depending on how much you've played it and memorized its little quirks. So it could be substantially more if it's your first time playing, I suppose. Between levels, there are some small cutscene sequences which offer some limited animation and a line or two of dialogue. Nothing to get too excited about, but they're probably the most visually impressive part of the game, so I figured I'd mention them. If there's one thing I love about this game though, it's the music. It's all really good, and it's probably one of my favorite soundtracks on the Game Boy. It just captures that Game Boy sound so well. It's only like 5 tracks, but do yourself a favor and find it on YouTube or something. It's really great stuff. Overall, Batman, the video game, for the Game Boy is a decent game. The control is alright once you get used to it, and the music is excellent, but it's still a very primitive game, and I don't think I could really call this a must-play. Sadly, I don't think it really takes advantage of the Batman license either, since it could easily be skinned with another property and lose nothing at all. It's a decent launch game, but all these years later, it doesn't really hold up as well as some of the later games. In just 2 years' time, games like Bionic Commando were being released on the Game Boy, which are vastly superior in every way. So this game leaves me feeling sort of meh, but damn, I love that music. I just wanted to close this one off by saying thanks everybody for being so patient and for watching this episode, and I'll see you next time.